From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a WisPolitics Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. I'm Adam Kellenhofer, reporter here at WisPolitics. Today, I'm joined in the office by my colleague Kate Morton to talk about an interview she just did with Wisconsin College Dems chair Matthew Lehner. So, Kate, what did you and Matthew get to talk about?
Yeah, Adam, we talked a little bit about the presidential primary earlier this month and what that means for President Joe Biden. We also talked a little bit about some of the priorities for young voters going into the 2024 election in November.
All right, Kate, sounds very interesting. Let's just jump right into it.
Well, hi, Matthew. Thank you for joining me today on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kate. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so to start things off, I just want to talk a little bit about the presidential primary that happened earlier this month. So, as you know, Uninstructed got more than 47,000 votes over Biden. We also saw Trump at 80% in the GOP primary, despite the fact that other candidates were no longer in the race. So I guess what's your analysis of that? Do you think Biden has any concerns to be watching out for with the uninstructed vote?
Yeah, I think that, what came out of that result is that, at the end of the day, at the Democratic convention, Joe Biden will be our nominee. And as Democrats, what we do after the primary season and after everything is said and done is we unify. And, of course, I do look at that uninstructed result, 47,000 approximately uninstructed votes, which is well within the margin of victory. And, a lot of those folks are rightfully very concerned about what is going on over in Israel and in the Gaza situation. I stand with those folks, and I understand that concern. I feel that concern very much too, because it is a terrible situation that is going on over there, and Netanyahu has lost control, unfortunately. And so I stand with those folks, and I hear there's those concerns, and I know President Biden to be somebody who listens to people, who, understands, the Democratic Party and understands Democratic primary voters. And I do believe that looking at those results, the Democratic Party has a clear, has a clear indicator of where to go forward for the general election. And I believe, just looking at those results and knowing the kind of party that we have, a party that is inclusive, that is, welcoming of all kinds of voices and different perspectives, that we will listen to those folks and move forward to November, because we need to.
Yeah, so going off of that, the Israel and Gaza concerns are particularly poignant among younger voters and younger progressives. So maybe you could tell me, is that something you're hearing from College Dems? And what are their takes on what's happening in Gaza right now and how it could impact their vote?
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly a big concern. And as I mentioned, it is a concern that I have too. I stand with young people and having those concerns. But I will just add, although this is a big issue that's going on right now, the humanitarian crisis that is happening over there are a lot of other issues at stake in this election besides Israel and Palestine. Our democracy is at stake. LGBTQI plus equality is at stake, racial equality. And those are all other issues that young people care about. And I really think that this election is a contrast. It really is a contrast between two different visions for America. You have one vision that is a hopeful, progressive, forward-thinking vision for America that, Joe Biden will say it himself. He knows he's old, but he wants to be a catalyst for the future, people in my generation to one day lead this country, accomplishing tremendous progressive policy areas, whether it's, the Inflation Reduction Act, whether it's the infrastructure law, something that all kinds of presidents talked about. So we have a record of accomplishment and a forward-thinking vision, contrasting that with somebody who stirs up hateful and divisive rhetoric, somebody who clears a protest for a photo op, somebody who potentially will be a convicted felon on the ballot for president. Potentially, I say potentially as a caveat there. But really, you have two different visions. And I think at the end of the day, yes, Israel-Palestine is an issue that young people do indeed care about very much. But there are a lot of other issues at stake in this election. And I have faith in young people, that young people will decide correctly in this election and decide to move our country forward rather than moving it backwards.
Yeah, there seem to be kind of enthusiasm issues across the board for this rematch. Do you think there's any potential for voters who are on the Republican side, who are kind of more skeptical of a Trump reelection, to come over to the Biden side? Do you see that as a possibility?
Yeah, I absolutely see that it's a possibility. I mean, you look at the primary vote and the Republican side, even though, some of these Republican candidates had dropped out, kind of way before the Wisconsin primary happened and had, clearly suspended their campaigns, people were still voting for them in pretty substantial numbers. And I think it was to send a message to, the Republicans that, look, we don't want, obviously in the Republican side, we don't want the party to go in that kind of direction. And, we want somebody who is a bit more moderate and who is a bit less divisive. And I think at the end of the day, again, this election being about a contrast, you look at the contrast between these two candidates. I do have faith that, given the career that Biden has built over many decades, as somebody who is willing and eager to work with Republicans, I think that's important to have in a president. I think Republicans will see that at the end of the day, somebody who has worked with Republicans to, get issues done like the infrastructure law and, uh, the law that protected marriage equality in this country, working with Republicans on those important things. And I think, we need to make that message clear as well in this election, that this is somebody who has, shown willingness time and time again throughout their presidency, even when frankly, Republicans have all Republicans have done is backstab President Biden, to still work with them and to put country ahead of party. And I think that is important in the eyes of many of these voters. And I think it's definitely a message that we need to be sharing as we go forward to the election.
So you mentioned earlier a little bit of some of the issues that younger voters might be concerned about going into the 2024 election.
Yeah.
Maybe you could expand on that, some of the most salient issues for younger voters in this election.
I think the biggest issue is reproductive rights. I think you're going to see it again in this election because we've seen it in the past elections in 2022 and 2023. So before becoming chair of Wisconsin College Democrats, I was the chapter chair at UW Eau Claire for the last 2 years. And, one of the things that, I have seen time and time again when it comes down to election day and when students are coming up to you to talk about what their concerns are, is that reproductive rights is, at the forefront of student concerns. And I think students are voting based on, which candidate will protect reproductive rights and which candidate will not. And obviously, Joe Biden has committed to working towards codifying Roe v. Wade into federal law, and has showed an openness and willingness to criticize the Supreme Court for what was a terrible and dark and divisive decision, versus Donald Trump, who in many ways is the architect of or the overturning of Roe v. Wade through appointing what I view and many Democrats and people around this country, frankly, view as radical, out-of-step people to the court to overturn Roe versus Wade. And so, yes, obviously, I think reproductive rights is going to be an important issue. And I think Michael Moore put it best, is that, when we were in, he kind of said before 2022, when there was a little bit of an enthusiasm gap, kind of what's kind of happening right now, and the polling wasn't looking so good. And he kind of mentioned, if you think these angry women are going to be going away and they're just going to be walking quietly into the night, you're wrong. They're not. They're still angry. And not only are women still angry from this decision, but young people are still angry from this decision. And young people, I believe in this generation, we do not forget. And what we have demonstrated in the last couple election cycles is we vote based on our values. We vote based on, who is, the progressive choice, somebody who is, what is the party, what is the candidate that is going to move the country forward. And so I think you're going to see that again. And obviously, some other issues too. I think climate change is on the ballot this election cycle. You have a president who has made one of the most significant down payments towards solving the climate crisis through the Inflation Reduction Act, and working towards getting our emission targets to net zero by 2050 and various other policy areas. You have a president who's focused on climate change, and then you have a president who is a former president, disgraced former president, who is not focused on climate change and who believes climate change is a hoax and still does. So issues like that are on the ballot again. I think young people are going to choose accordingly. I think we've seen that in the last 2 election cycles, and you're going to see it again in 2024.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I guess before we wrap it up, is there anything you wanted to add about young voters, maybe any misconceptions about young voters, anything like that?
Yeah, I would say the biggest misconception about young voters is that, we kind of, that we're not focused and that we're not energized or mobilized and that, we're not going to turn out this time around. Frankly, I saw that rhetoric in both election cycles. I saw it in 2022. I saw it in 2023. And frankly, now I'm seeing it again in 2024. And the rhetoric is dead wrong about that. We've proved that to be wrong in 2022 and 2023, especially in 2023, where, a Supreme Court election is not supposed to have, extraordinarily high turnout. It's supposed to have low interest when in fact you saw students lining up for sometimes hours to wait to cast their right to vote and not being unwavering in that, continuing to stay in line until they are able to cast their ballot. And so I absolutely think, that kind of rhetoric that young people don't care and that we're not focused and that, we're not going to show up this time around is dead wrong. This is, the most progressive generation that we've seen in this country in a long time. This is the most engaged and what I believe to be one of the most informed generations in our country. And we will continue to show up again in 2024 because all of these issues are on the ballot. And as I mentioned before, the contrast between the two candidates could not be more clear. And I have faith in young people and that young people will choose to move our country forward and not backwards.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us to share that perspective.
Yeah, appreciate it, Kate. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome, Kate. Thank you for bringing us that interview. It was a pleasure to have Matthew on the show. If our listeners want to read more about what's going on with the presidential election, they can head over to our website at wispolitics.com. But for now, I'm Adam Kelnhofer.
I'm Kate Morton.
Thanks for tuning in to WisPolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.